Sam Watts, Executive Director and CEO of the Welcome Hall Mission. Thank you so much for joining us today. Sam, thank you for taking time out of your really busy schedule to have a conversation with me today. I really appreciate your time.
Oh, you're very welcome. These are fun to do.
Well, we're hoping to, I know that we're going to have an interesting conversation, and you're absolutely brilliant. For anybody who watches the news even remotely, Sam, you've been a face that we've seen time and time again, talking about the homeless situation in Montreal, but I think also across the country. You're extremely knowledgeable, and you have a path unlike any other, going from a career in corporate to finding yourself leading this incredible organization. So can you talk to us a little bit about what that path looked like and walk us through your career for a few minutes?
Well, I guess, sure, I can do that. I'm probably the most unlikely person, it certainly wasn't in my career plan, to end up as the CEO of Welcome Hall Mission, or Mission Bon Accueil en français. But one day, kind of out of the blue, I got a phone call from a headhunter who said the current CEO of Welcome Hall Mission is retiring. They were very transparent about what it was. And I've had some people tell me that you'd be an ideal candidate. And we talked for a little bit, as you often do. And I said, no, I really enjoy what I'm doing. I'd had a fairly extensive career in the corporate sector. 14 years I'd been working as a very targeted management consultant around things like team performance. And in doing that, I had worked with a number of not-for-profit boards around their strategic plan and how their team was working together. So that might have put me on the radar. But my initial conversation was, I don't think I'm the right person. Then I went home and told my wife that Welcome Hall Mission had called, and she had a question for me. I've told this story a number of times. She said, so if the Montreal Canadiens had phoned you and asked you to come in and talk to them about being the general manager of the Canadiens, what would your answer have been? And I said, well, gee whiz, I don't know anything about running a hockey team, but this is the Montreal Canadiens. I think I'd go in and have a chat with them. And she said, well, I think you should then go in and have a chat with Welcome Hall Mission. They're an organization that was founded a long time ago. In fact, the organization was founded in 1892. So it's an iconic Montreal organization that has been doing work in the community for a long period of time, is reasonably well known. So I decided to take her advice, which is probably a smart thing. And, so I went in and chatted with them. And what I found was an organization that had all of the bones. My predecessor had done a great job of constructing what I thought was not just a framework, but a well framed out organization. And it was ripe and ready to be taken to the next level. And so a number of the things that I had done over my career seemed to make it an interesting fit for somebody like me. And the sorts of things that they needed at that point in time made it an interesting fit. And sort of the only thing that I didn't have was I had never been a CEO before. And so I'd done a lot of very senior things. I'd walked alongside CEOs in a lot of the practice that I'd done over the last 14 years or so, the previous 14 years. So the day that I walked into the mission for the first time, I was the CEO. That's very unusual in this sector. Normally in this sector, you work around in a number of places, you do a number of roles. You may have been in the philanthropic side, or you may have been a frontline worker, and you work your way up in the organization.
Coming from nonprofit, and you were moving from outside. So
exactly. And so here I was an outsider, and that got around. The media interviewed me a little bit to say, what's an outsider doing running Welcome Hall Mission? I think that was one of the headlines. And so there were, for the first year or so, it was really about learning how the sector worked and how the organization worked, because it's a complex enough organization. At the time, there was 100 employees, and we were, running at about a $10-15 million operation. Today, it's more than double that. And so that's sort of my backstory of how I got to where I got to. And it's probably been, I would say, one of the best decisions of my life in terms of how it has worked out. And I'd like to think that what has happened over the last 10 years, I didn't bank on leading the mission through a global pandemic, but there are lots of interesting things that have happened that I think I've learned a lot. And I hope I've also been able to contribute a lot to the cause of the mission.
So Sam, I mean, I'm curious, what had you move forward with so you go for your first interview with them, and what clicked for you and made the shift in your mind from going from corporate and consulting, right, into this completely new world?
Well, I think the interesting thing that I've told a lot of younger people when they've asked me about how do you know what fit is right for you, often you don't on the spot. But I find that when you look back over your shoulder, that the experiences that you've had along the way in your career often prepare you for that next step. And so what I was able to do was look backwards and say, well, so what are some of the things that I've done and what did I learn from what I've done? And so often you go, wait a second, I think I would never have been ready for something like this if I hadn't done X and Y. And so those are the sorts of things that I think can prove to be kind of interesting for you. And I don't know if that's a really good answer to your question, but to me, careers are often not something we can plan out, particularly today.
Right.
I remember when I started in my very first sort of real big job, that I got a letter on my desk on the first day that described all the company's benefits, and it also had my retirement date on it. And the presumption was, because it was a big, huge company, the presumption was that I would be there until my retirement. And of course, that's not the way it works these days. And often we'll switch organizations and we'll switch even careers. And I've said to a number of university graduates that the job that they're going to have in 10 years probably doesn't even exist right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what were some of the skills that you had that translated really well from corporate to nonprofit? And then what were some of the skills that you needed to flex and work on?
That's a good question. I think for the purposes of running a not-for-profit, I had been around operational people a lot. Now, I'm not an operations guy, but when you're around them, you kind of learn a few things just by absorbing the lingo and by seeing some of the things they do. The other thing is you need to know your way around a balance sheet, because in social worker school, they don't often teach you how to run something from a financial point of view or even how to read a set of financial statements. And so in the not-for-profit world, there is often some gaps in the area of management. It's one of the things that I highlighted in the book that I wrote, Good Work Done Better, is that the sector is replete with people who have wonderful intentions and a heart for people in need or animals in need, or name your cause. They have a heart for the cause, but often don't bring with them the requisite management skills that are essential to running an organization that's trying to serve a cause. And you don't serve the cause well if at the end of the day, the organization is not well managed. Right. And so I think one of the things that was really important was to bring those management skills, and I call them the disciplines of the private sector, into a not-for-profit environment. Now, of course, the thing that you also need to learn in a not-for-profit environment is you do deal with a lot of volunteers. And so volunteers are often not as easy to manage as employees. They're a little more fluid in terms of their availability and things like that. So you've got to take that into account. And the other thing, too, is that in a not-for-profit environment, you don't have the same levers that you can use in a for-profit environment. One of the big ones is money. So as in a for-profit environment, you can offer people more money, big bonuses, promotions, things like that sometimes we think motivate people to do better work. I question that assumption, but nonetheless, that's what gets generally done in the business world. In the not-for-profit world, you need people who are really committed to the cause. And so if to start with, the person isn't committed to the cause, then they're probably in the wrong place and they're going to figure that out pretty quickly. You can work in a corporate setting and not really care about the cause of the organization that you're working for. When you come over onto the not-for-profit side, you better have a passion for the cause. Now, you need to also bring competency, because if you're not competent and you just care deeply about the cause, but you can't get the work done, well, then that becomes a problem. But I think those are the sorts of things, the big difference really between the for-profit world and the not-for-profit world is at the end of the day, we're not trying to make money for shareholders.
Right.
But we are trying to do something for people who benefit from our services in a way that is unique and different and that meets an unmet need. And so I think that's where the major difference is. You got to figure out, so we're not trying to make a profit, but we do have to run the place in a sustainable fashion, because if you don't do that, then you can't really speak into the cause. You can't address the cause the way that you'd like to.
So what were some of the biggest surprises that you had in moving into this new sector in terms of, your own learning? Was it dealing with government? Was it dealing with funders? What was it?
Probably a whole lot of things. I had dealings with the government. I had fortunately had some good media training, because all of a sudden you're thrust into a bit of a media spotlight. The media wants you to comment on a variety of things. And because we're in a number of different sectors, those sectors become fairly important, and you get media people who want you to comment, want you to be involved in things. And of course, there's questions that can trap you from time to time if you're not careful. I think, the other thing that was different was when I came to meetings of other people in our sector. Often I was amazed at how little data was involved. In many cases, we were very anchored in anecdotes and stories, which are important. Don't get me wrong on that. The stories matter, the people matter. But if you're telling me that demand has gone up 30%, well, is that 3 people or 300 people? Because that matters. Yes. If you tell me, for example, that you turned away 200 women from your emergency shelter last week, was it the same 22 people every night, or was it 200 unique individuals? Mm-hmm. That matters, because we need to make sure that we're making data-informed decisions. And when you're dealing with government input as well into the social services sector, you can't sit at a table with government and say, well, things are growing, or we're seeing more of this or less of that, because they're always going to want to quantify what you mean by that. And so I was totally amazed to see how the sector was so used to trading in stories, and sometimes dramatic stories of one individual, but is that one individual truly representative of what we're seeing across the sector? And so still so much of that out there today. I would say 10 years into my mandate, the sector is much better at articulating data than it was at the onset when I first started here in 2016. I think the pandemic focused us around that a little bit, but we still need to get a whole lot better in that area.
So Sam, for those who are listening and might not be familiar with Welcome Hall, Michigan, can you talk about services that are offered? Because there's a story that you had shared with me a number of years ago that I've repeated and I've loved it, in terms of your HR leader who had, I think, organized a series of interviews for some of your some of the people that you were supporting who had a certain class of license as drivers, right? And so they were able to get hired working in the transportation sector. And I was like, I had no idea that this was something, a service that you offered. I don't know if it was a one-off or if you've continued to offer those types of services, but can you educate our listeners in terms of also maybe how it's grown under your leadership in terms of the services that Welcome Hall now offers?
Yeah, I mean, I'll touch on that one specifically. I mean, often we find people coming in through our doors who do have skills or who can quickly acquire skills that make them employable. And so one of the things that we try to do is identify what those might be, rather than just deliver services of the moment to people. Back in the day, if you rewind the tape to 50 years ago, people who were addressing the challenge of homelessness treated day centers and overnight shelters as if that was some sort of destination for people experiencing homelessness. And today, I think we all recognize that emergency services are not where it's at. Emergency services need to exist, but they can't be the endpoint. And so we have to work on things that are upstream and downstream from those emergency services so that the emergency room, I can call it that, parallel to a hospital, you don't want your emergency room to be overflowing.
Yeah.
And right now in Montreal, at least it is. So the interesting thing about Welcome Hall Mission is I use two words to describe us, and the words are residential stability. And that helps us understand what we do across a wide spectrum of programs and services. So if someone is experiencing homelessness, our objective is to help them become residentially stable. Okay. Now, what that involves often is a series of steps or programs or, sometimes housing right away. It depends on the individual, but we want them to become stable. And that often includes making sure that they have wraparound supports and a sense of a greater community once they're in housing, because you put somebody back into housing who was unhoused, four walls and a roof don't do it. That person needs to be surrounded by the right kinds of services and the right kinds of community connections to make that housing experience successful. But for people who are already housed, we're also interested in residential stability because there's a lot of people who are precariously housed. They're one paycheck away, or they're living on the edge, or they haven't paid their rent for a couple of months. They could very easily become unhoused. And for them, we have a series of services and programs as well, including our 2 free grocery stores, where people come in and are able to shop for their own groceries and obtain a full week's worth of groceries so that they can take care of their family or themselves if they're a single person. And what that allows a person to do who is experiencing some level of poverty is deal with that elastic part of their budget. When someone is poor, you got to pay the rent, you got to pay for childcare, you got to buy your bus pass. There's so many things that you've got to do. Food becomes that piece that you can spend a little on or a lot on. And so that's why we have the 2 free grocery stores, because it allows people to come in. And of course, our goal always is not to keep people in our services. I'd like to joke with my corporate friends that we love to lose clients. They love to keep them. But we exist to try to get people to a point where they don't need us anymore. And so we have a variety of things. We have a 6 operatory free dental clinic in partnership with McGill. We have a number of different partnerships with the healthcare sector, like partnerships in mental health, where we run 2 they're very housing focused mental health units that help men and women who are experiencing homelessness become stable. There's a psychiatrist there full time with nurses and social workers. And then within 10 to 12 weeks, usually that person goes into permanent housing, and then they're followed up by outpatient services very robustly, but they're followed up. And that's a much better outcome than having somebody in the hospital system, in a hospital room where there's all kinds of rules and regulations, and it's a foreign environment for them. So that works quite well. So we work very hard on being that entry point to health and social services in conjunction with that network that we already have of health services here in the province of Quebec.
And how many people are you supporting in a given year? And are you seeing an uptick in services that are needed?
Well, on the food security side, it's about 9,000 people a month who come into our 2 free grocery stores. And that makes us by far and away the largest organization serving people in need of free food in the city. And, we have a big infrastructure to support that. I mean, our food warehouse is 350,000 cubic feet. It's big. Everything that we do tends to be big, but it's always only one person at a time. On the housing side, there is a lot of energy that goes into how we work with housing providers, because we don't do permanent housing. We help people get to a point where they can go into permanent housing. So we have partnerships with landlords, and we have a system that helps people migrate from where they are to where they're going to be. And we house about one person every single day of the calendar year. So I think we're tracking about 400 for 2025. And, variety of programs, variety of different ways that people get into housing. It might be social housing. It might be with a private landlord, but that's the sort of order of magnitude. So yes, we're a large organization, but I keep telling people that the minute we forget that it's all about one person at a time, one journey at a time, one set of needs that's very different from another, If we forget that, that's going to become problematic for us. And it doesn't really matter how big you are. It's really about how well do you serve the people that you aim to serve.
I'm curious, Sam. I mean, if you could redesign Montreal's homelessness and housing ecosystem from scratch, right? Like where would you even start?
That's something that very badly needs to be done, by the way.
Yeah.
Because we've been stuck in a loop of charity for 150 years. And I've got absolutely nothing against charity, by the way. I think that's a wonderful reflex to have. But a charitable system or a charitable service model can't resolve a complex social problem. Yeah. And that's why you're continuing to see a growth in unhoused people, even though we are housing more people as an ecosystem than we ever have before. And part of the problem is that the inflow into homelessness is greater than the outflow right now. And that's why you're seeing a growth in the number of emergency spaces and a growth in the number of encampments in virtually every city in North America. So the redesign has to happen upstream. So what we need to do is make sure that we can keep people in housing. Canada is one of the few countries in the world that has legislated the human right to housing. Now, it's not able to be enforced in the courts, but we do have it, the National Housing Strategy Act of 2019. So when I sit on the National Housing Council, my mandate by the minister is to advise him on matters that relate to the progressive realization of the human right to housing. So we know that we're not going to get there tomorrow. Yeah. But we need to work on making sure that upstream, people who are housed can stay there. Now, we're always going to have people who will fall between the cracks. There are always situations that, often the root cause for homelessness is social disconnection. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you and I, Samantha, were experiencing difficulty, there's probably a good chance that a member of our family would take us in, care for us, do something, at least for a while. Yeah. But when somebody loses all connection with friends, family, or maybe they burn bridges, and a number of things happen in their life, they very quickly go on to a downslope that can lead to loss of housing. And we need to make sure that we have the systems in place upstream of the ecosystem of care that are at least doing the best job of prevention. And there's a number of things that we pointed out to our governments where they were actually manufacturing homelessness. For example, the exit from care of young people at age 18. So if a young person is in the care of the state, yes, and at age 18 plus 1 day, they're exiting with no life plan, that's manufacturing the potential for homelessness. Same thing goes for exit from incarceration. Almost all the time, we know 6 months or 12 months in advance when somebody's going to be getting out of a situation where they're incarcerated. Well, we need to work upstream to make sure that there's a plan in place for that individual so they don't end up knocking on our door and being unhoused, and then potentially committing another crime in order to go back into a situation where they're more secure.
I remember hearing, going to a conference. It was a LinkedIn conference in the States, and there was a woman who was president of an organization, a company. So she had been previously incarcerated, and she said the rate of recidivism was so high because people weren't able to find a job, nobody wanted to hire an ex-con, et cetera, et cetera. So she started a call center where they weren't working with, credit card information or anything touching money, but she started the business so that those who were incarcerated could start working from the prison system so that when they got out, they would just have that continuity of work. And I thought that was so interesting. I haven't really heard of those types of programs here, but it makes so much sense, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I think we're doing a better job now on the two areas that I talked about. Yeah. Because we pointed it out to government, but there's things that we can do for people who are struggling. And, the biggest driver of homelessness is I can't afford my rent. And when that happens, there's a variety of programs that are out there that we refer to as rent supplements. And it is far, far less expensive and far less damaging to a person's dignity to have them use a rent supplement where their rent is topped up so they can stay in housing than it is to have somebody evicted. Because once somebody's evicted, the cost of having somebody in the system of care is enormous. And I've shown data to government officials that indicates that a person that we can support in housing costs about half of what it costs to have somebody on the street. And then you get the people who advocate for institutionalizing people. Well, first of all, we don't have enough institutions. But secondly, that cost is incredibly high. So if you have somebody in jail or in a medical institution where they're kept there, the cost is enormous. And so the answer to the challenge of homelessness always moves by the pathway of housing. Keeping someone there, maintaining someone there, or getting somebody back to that point where they can be housed and either cared for with wraparound services and robust follow-up, or independent, which is, of course, the gold standard.
Sam, talk to us about your book, because you have a second book coming out. Congratulations on finding, I don't know where you find the time, actually, but talk to us about what that book is going to be about.
Well, the new book, once I sort through a couple of final ideas, I've got a manuscript and now I'm tweaking it, but it really touches on what I call 12 non-negotiables around leadership in a not-for-profit sector. Now, I also suggest that a lot of these principles are perfectly applicable for leaders anywhere they are, but there's some things that I think can be disregarded or can be glossed over in the sector where I serve, and you do that at your peril if you're a leader. And so that's what I'm focusing on, because I think one of the things that we have done in the sector, in the not-for-profit sector, is it's almost been whoever was willing to sort of sacrifice themselves, we put them in a role of leadership in our sector. And so I've certainly been in rooms with people who were nominally leaders, but they probably couldn't lead a group in silent prayer. They were just willing to step up, and you got to applaud them for that. But the leadership skill or the leadership experience or the leadership reflexes that one needs to have, I felt like this was something that I could at least speak into, share some ideas and see if they land with people. I'm always somebody who says, hey, if there's a good idea here, take it and run with it. If there's a bunch of stuff you disagree with, well, great. But I'm putting my ideas out there and hoping that people can benefit from the experience, some of the successes that I might have had, but also some of the mistakes I've made.
Fantastic. I'm curious what your thoughts are. When you were working in corporate, did you ever discount kind of the experience that people would bring from the nonprofit sector? Like, I know a lot of times, when we're working with corporations, they're not terribly interested in getting talent that's coming from the nonprofit sector. I think there's a lot of assumptions that are made around the grit or the work that they're doing or their knowledge. What would you say, corporations could learn from folks working in the nonprofit sector?
That's interesting. I've had that question an awful lot when I do presentations in academia, because I think there are some transferable things from one side to the other. As I said earlier, I think the not-for-profit sector can learn about the business disciplines that can be quite well applied in the not-for-profit world, and they can be applied in a way that helps you serve more people better or serve the cause better, whatever the cause is. On the other side of the coin, which is where you asked the question, I think there are some things that one picks up in the not-for-profit world that I think the corporate world would do really well to learn from. One of them is the idea of focusing around a cause. And the cause has to be more than how much money are we going to make next quarter. So when I see people who are demotivated, and I walk through a host of businesses in the course of my 14 years of consulting, and there were a lot of very well-paid people, well-educated people, smart people who really didn't like their jobs and were just waiting for the day when they could retire from the corporation. And often it had to do with not having a firm enough belief that what they were doing was making a difference. And I think increasingly, particularly when I talk to university students these days, there is this profound sense that if I'm going to commit to a good chunk of my life in doing some form of work, that work ought to have some kind of identifiable purpose.
Yes.
And that purpose has to be more than just how much money can I make or how much money can I make for the boss. And so I think that's one of the big things, one of the big takeaways. The other one that I think is increasingly important is the notion that in the not-for-profit world, we try to do an awful lot with little in the way of resources.
Yeah.
And so I always hear comments from just about everybody. I certainly heard it in the corporate world, even with great big businesses that I walk through, that, oh, we don't have enough resources. Well, my take from that is nobody ever has enough resources, regardless of whether you're running a $100,000 a year not-for-profit organization or a $100 million corporation. There's always going to be gaps in resources. The question is, how do you deploy those resources in the best possible way? Now, coming from the not-for-profit world, there's often people who have the experience of being able to innovate and find ways to get things done in ways that are unconventional. And I think that's something that can be brought over into the corporate world. I see it migrating as well. I certainly have seen evidence of that over the last number of years. And I think it's something that can continue. I think there are some skill sets in that not-for-profit space that would be quite useful in the corporate space.
Well, on innovation, and actually, hang on one second. I just want to mention to our viewers, listeners, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to put them in the chat, by the way, and I'll check the chat in a couple of minutes, and we'll get Sam to answer any questions that you might have. But when you're talking about innovation, I'm wondering, how do you cultivate a culture of innovation inside your C-suite in the nonprofit space?
Well, I can tell you how I do it. I don't know if it's necessarily
done it,
the only
yes.
way, but by asking questions. I'm big on asking questions. Are we doing things the best possible way? I'll give you a very concrete example. When I first arrived here, the way we did free food for people who were housed, so people who are coming into what people might refer to as a food bank. We call ours a free grocery store, but that's a technicality, I guess. But at a free grocery store, you shop, you don't just get given something. But what we had at the time was a bunch of long tables, and people would come along and volunteers would hand them things that they could have. And so we began to ask ourselves the question, well, wait a second. Is this the only way to give away free food? And somebody, I don't know who it was in the room, raised the notion of a grocery store. Well, when you go to a grocery store, this happens or that happens. And a light bulb flashed with a bunch of us. And we said, grocery store. So what would happen if people could come in and make their own choices? Oh, and a number of people raised problems. Well, what if somebody goes and empties out a container into their grocery cart? We said, no, we could actually organize that so your quantity is limited by the size of your family. And so we reorganized ourselves around the concept of a grocery store. A good example of what changed was we used to have a lineup out our door for people who would be coming in to get free food. And we saw that as a badge of honor. Look how long our line is. A couple of our operations people said lineups are inefficient. Yep. And okay, yeah, I agree with you. We don't line up to get into a grocery store. So what we did was we gave everybody a card. That's a plastic card, looks like a Costco card. And it's got your picture on the back and a barcode, and people can reserve their spot inside half an hour increments. So we don't have any lineups. When you come to the free grocery store, there's maybe two people in front of you, but when you and I go to a grocery store, we don't line up to go in, do we?
But there's also dignity with that.
Absolutely.
Right? Versus taking something, I'm taking something, you're giving me something, versus I'm shopping for my family and I'm selecting also, right? I think there's a lot of dignity in that.
And it's around innovating around a concept. And it's an interesting thing because when we opened up our second free grocery store up in Montreal North, one of the leaders in our sector came and he gave a little speech. And I'd never heard it put this way before. He said, Welcome Hall Mission was the leader in a certain service model, but they were not afraid to blow up that service model in order to do something better.
Wow.
And I thought, oh, okay, I didn't think of it that way, but now that you say it, that's something that in the corporate world, technically, we're not afraid of doing that, are we? We sometimes have to blow something up. We have to walk away from a way of doing things in order to do something better. In the not-for-profit world, often we're anchored in a certain model of the way we've always done it, or because program money that might be coming from somewhere is tied to a particular way of doing things or a particular set of deliverables. And so what we have to be prepared to do is to say, let's pause and ask ourselves some questions about what is the best way of doing what we're doing, and then what improvements can we consistently be looking to bring to that thing.
So interesting. You're leading, hundreds of employees. How many employees are at Welcome Hall?
About 200 today.
Yeah, 200, hundreds of volunteers. What are some leadership behaviors that you found have most reliably built trust and performance at that level, and for this space as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. I ask myself that one all the time, because visibility is very important, as so is accessibility. And so one of the first things that I did when I came to the role is everybody referred to the leader of the organization as Mr. or as the CEO. I'm Sam. And so I try to be very approachable. While we were talking here, somebody came into my office and put some cookies on my desk. People know who I am. I walk around and I talk a lot. One of the 4 things I do, I think I've said this to you before, is I think I do 4 things as a CEO. One of the key 4 things that I do is walk around and repeat the vision. So it's very easy in a not-for-profit context, I think in a for-profit context too, to get focused on the task that I am about to do, the thing that's right in front of me, the role that I play. And what I try to do when I walk around and repeat the vision is I talk about the fact that our role here at the mission is to transform our city. And it's to transform it so that people everywhere in our city and in the region have shelter, food, and community. And I repeat that in a variety of different ways so that I don't sound like a broken record. But I remind people that whether they're working in the warehouse or whether they're working in HR or whether they're working driving trucks for us or whether they're in finance, that we're all contributing towards this belief, this cause, this vision that we have of the city that we serve being a better place for people in need, so that there are fewer vulnerable people. And so I think that's an important leadership behavior, is walking around and authentically speaking to what the vision is. And, to my way of thinking, that accessibility and that the fact that people see that that's what we're talking about, it reminds them of, yes, I might be doing inventory right now, but I'm contributing to a much larger cause.
Excellent. Let me take a second to see if we have any comments or questions. We've got somebody who's listening in from Dubai. Welcome. Somebody else said, hi, Sam and Sam. Big fan of both of you. Thank you. One question I have is, if someone who has made a career in the private business sector and is thinking of making a jump to the private sector, what are some things for that person to consider?
So private to
corporate to nonprofit. Sorry, perhaps trade-offs or potential gains when making the transition. That's a really great question. I don't know who put that. It just says LinkedIn user, but happy to have you here. So that was one of the questions that I had, actually. So go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, it's a question I get a lot because I did it, and others have too. I'm not unique in that respect. I've certainly seen people. My buddy James Hughes is a lawyer. He leads the Old Brewery Mission. There's a number of other people who had careers that were quite successful in a variety of different professional capacities. And, I think one of the key things is, one of the truths is, you're going to make less money in the not-for-profit world than you will in the for-profit world. So, and what I mean is sort of role for role. It's not the same. So you have to be prepared to make that kind of sacrifice. Now, in an ideal situation, it shouldn't be that huge a sacrifice, because I'm a big proponent of not-for-profits getting with the program and paying people reasonably well, and we do that here at the mission. But by the same token, that's a rule that you're going to have to accept. So the dollars are not the same as if you're working in the healthcare network or if you're working for the government and that sort of thing. I think the one of the positives can be that if you select the right organization and it's a cause that pulls at your heartstrings, I think your own personal satisfaction may end up being better. I think I've stumbled on to the role of my life. I can't think of a better sort of business and career decision that I made than the sort of accidental discovery that I should be the CEO at this mission. And so that can be quite satisfying. Recognize as well that there will still be difficult moments. There is this thought that sometimes in the not-for-profit world that all is wonderful, that people are lovely. They aren't necessarily. I've had to deal with some very tough stuff here in my role. Situations that you'd say, well, I'm surprised that exists in an organization that serves the disadvantaged. Well, something. There are people who are bad actors in just about every organization. And sometimes you need to, discover who they are and make sure that they don't continue to stay.
Yeah.
I have something that I call a no jerks policy at Welcome Hall Mission. And so we try to very quickly discover if somebody is a jerk, then they don't stay here, because I want an environment that's safe and that's friendly and that's fun. We're very big around having fun here because, we do tough stuff on the front lines of this organization. And if we're not smiling and having fun, then, what's the point? So I don't know if that helps answer, but I've babbled a little bit, and maybe it'll be helpful. But I would say that somebody who's considering that kind of a move, evaluate your skill sets as well. This is one thing that I've said to people: figure out what it is that you can actually bring to a not-for-profit, because sometimes people aim for a role and they haven't thought about the things that they bring that make them eligible for that role. So it's not about the title, it's about, sort of why would you be paid to do something? And if you can articulate that, then that's also a good thing.
As you're talking about, some of the struggles that and the big things that your teams are having to face and find solutions to, I'm thinking about the mental health of your employees, right? And whether it's, Welcome Hall. I mean, there's a number of organizations everywhere, but in Montreal, that are dealing with some really tough, sad, horrible situations. And so do you feel that mental health piece is more important to support in a way, or is more prevalent maybe in the nonprofit sector than we would see in corporate?
Well, I certainly see a lot of people in the corporate world who are taking breaks because of issues related to mental health. And I think anybody who works in HR would confirm that. But something, on the front lines in organizations like ours, we are dealing with some pretty tough stuff.
Yes.
And yes, it is, I would say, wearing on people. Frontline workers often have to take breaks. We give people 12 days, aside from their vacation, of time that they can take off. And then we have special situations that occur, like when we got somebody who unfortunately dies while they're in our care. That's traumatic for the people involved. And so we have counselors that come in, and we have people taking time off around that sort of an event. Those are the sorts of things that can occur. So yes, it is a struggle on the front lines. And I would say it's a struggle as well at the supervisory level, because we're often dealing with situations that are a little bit tough and demanding. And, when you're running something like an emergency shelter, and we have a couple of those, you have people coming in off the street that are not always going to obey the sort of the protocols of the building, and you've got to negotiate that and set expectations. And we have things that we do, like, making sure that we keep a bubble between ourselves and the people involved, because you sort of know, you never know what's going to happen. So you always got to be on your toes.
Yeah.
So that's the sort of thing that can wear on somebody's mental health. And we've certainly seen plenty of evidence of people struggling in that area. And we try to support people. And at the same time, it's not a job that's for everyone.
Thanks, Sam. We do have, Kate, she said a free grocery store. That's such a huge and important pivot. Bravo. I love that. That's lovely. Yeah. What gives you hope right now? And where do you see the biggest opportunity for courageous leadership?
Well, I've always described myself as an optimist because I don't think I'd be doing what I was doing or what I'm doing here if I wasn't an optimist. I would have moved on and gone and done something different. But I think leaders have an enormous opportunity, regardless of the sector that you're in, to help shape the environment. You have a lot to say as a leader. And even if you're not the ultimate leader of the organization, if you're leading a team, you have an opportunity to shape the culture of that team. Now, there are always outside and environmental factors. And, even as the CEO of this place, one of the big things that I do is try to manage that outside environment that comes in on our organization. So I'm dealing with government ministers. I'm dealing with various bureaucrats. I'm dealing with people in the hospital systems. I'm dealing with the media a lot. So those are factors that are outside, but the leader has that unique opportunity to help shape the kind of culture that you have in your organization or in your team. And I think if you exude optimism and hope as a leader, and you can give good reason for why you have that optimism and hope, then I think you can build that culture into the people that surround you. And so I spoke a little earlier about having fun. Well, every once in a while, I'm sitting in my office here at the moment, but I'll hear laughter ripple out through the floor that I'm on. And what I typically do is I go outside and I have this thing that I do where I say, hey, stop laughing. This is a very serious place. And everybody knows that I'm having a little fun with them. But you create that expectation that it's okay to release a little bit of tension. It's okay to have fun. It's okay to laugh. And there's a lot of little things that you can do as a leader that help frame the culture, that help support people. Little things like the first thing I do every single morning is I check and see whose birthday it is today. And I send them an email message to tell, wish them happy birthday and thank them for being part of the cause. And usually I know where it is they work. I don't know absolutely every single employee that we have. I used to back in the day, but when we've gone from 100 to 200 employees, I don't know everybody. But I still talk about the work that they do and thank you for doing it. And it was so funny. The other day I was walking into one of our buildings and somebody stopped me and said, "Excuse me, sir, where are you going?"
To work.
That's great. Security is working here because they didn't recognize who I was. And that's good stuff, because then I identified myself as, "Oh, sorry. So, no, it's good. You're doing your job here." So I think that's important, and it's fun to be able to validate people and to, the old story of catching somebody doing something right. I love to celebrate when somebody is doing something right, and when somebody does something that often is just a little thing, but those little things add up to a lot of experiences, and also they end up being the thing that other people look to. And they see that person being celebrated for doing something right, and they end up emulating that kind of behavior.
Sam, as you're speaking, I'm wondering, what is it? And if we go back to earlier in the conversation where you mentioned that social isolation, what do you think companies could be doing right now? What could HR leaders be doing, and leaders within organizations to flag a potential risk? Because people might not open up about where they're at, right? But is there, maybe I'm naive in asking this question, but is there something that companies could maybe put into place or do that could support their employees who might really be at risk for being unhoused?
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, one of the biggest risks, frankly, is loss of a partner. So we see that happen sometimes where it does take two incomes sometimes to support a housing situation. Yeah. So if someone is divorced or separated, or someone has a partner who passes away, that can sometimes put the person at risk. So if an HR leader is aware of that, that can be something that can be kind of helpful. I think that's a factor. The other thing that's going on a lot, and we see this in our own organization, is we have an increasing number of people who have aging parents. And often that puts pressure on their home situation, on their life situation. They might be managing kids, and they might be managing young adults who have just exited, and they're helping them out. And then they've got aging parents. And so there's a lot of life situations that can come into play in a person's work and the work environment. And I think a great deal of flexibility is often called for. Here at the mission, other than people whose role is very time and place, we don't get too apoplectic about whether you're in a location at 9 o'clock in the morning or not. I'm looking around out I've got a big glass wall here, and I don't see very many people in the office at the moment. I think partly because it's a Friday and partly because it's windy here. And so some people decided to work from home. That's fine. So, we're very good about that sort of thing. So I think adding flexibility into the mix is important. I think people do need to sometimes be together in order to generate the kind of chemistry that's necessary to move an organization along. Yeah. But at the same time, I think there's a certain amount of flexibility that can be called for, and that can be helpful in making sure that people are able to be supported in the way that you suggest.
I'm going to share, let me put up the website for, there we go. Anybody who's watching. Sam, I'm going to look, this is, inside the C-suite, and we're talking about leadership, but I also want to take the opportunity as we get into, the holiday season. What are the most pressing needs that your organization has right now? And how can people help? I mean, donations, obviously, but is there anything else? And let me just, put that back up again.
That's interesting. Somebody asked me that this morning, and I said it's really, donations obviously are helpful. And that's we can actually turn your donations into something that's 3 or 4x times the amount of money. So I don't counsel people to buy stuff for us, because then you're paying in after-tax dollars. You might as well give a donation and get a tax receipt for it and take advantage of the deduction that you can gain by doing that. The other thing that I usually ask people to do if they're passionate about the cause is act as kind of an ambassador for the cause or for the organization, to let people know that there are solutions that are out there. We don't have to accept in any country in the world that people should be unhoused. And frankly, I think I'm able to rewind the tape back to a time when I could walk around our city and not really see anybody who was unhoused. I wouldn't see them in the subway. I wouldn't see them in the parks and the public spaces. I think we can get back to that time. Now, not next week or even next year, but we need to work our way back towards that, because we do know what the solutions are. The solutions will require political courage and cooperation of all levels of government. But you asked before, why am I optimistic? Why do I have hope? It's because I'm finally seeing a certain amount of synergy coming together in at least the governments in Canada and a number of other European countries, where they're saying, hey, wait a second, we actually know what the solutions are to this. We can resolve it if we put all the right people around the table and get started on the right actions, and this can be done. And so I think acting as an ambassador for the cause is something that I would say to your listeners, that's an easy one. Tell your friends about us.
And also companies, I mean, to your point earlier, this new generation that's entered the workforce, they're, well, I would say, I'm also seeing, Gen X wanting to give more time back to organizations as well. But we have seen organizations say we need to do more in terms of supporting our communities, right? Because we have employees who, early talent that are asking us the questions of where do we put our money and how do we support community? So do you have specific programs where you're working with corporations where people can go in more than just once in the year to serve food, but maybe like an actual program that organizations can get involved in?
Yes, and several organizations. In fact, there's a good study that's out by the London School of Economics that demonstrates quite clearly that engagement in a corporation is accentuated by about 40% if that organization, if that corporation regularly does a certain type of community activity. So pick your thing and do it regularly. Don't just have one volunteer day and then forget about it for the rest of the year as if now, tick, we've done our thing. But if you turn that into something that is part and parcel of what we do as an organization, that's really good. The other thing that I point out, and this is an important consideration, is I tell people if you see something that tugs at your heartstrings and you'd like to see it resolved, please, please, please don't take matters into your own hands. Do things the right way. And the right way often involves, almost always, finding an organization in the space that's already doing the work and joining them, finding ways to join them.
Yeah.
You might need to search around a little bit, but we have, something called the internet. You can find an organization near you or one that you can reasonably support. Do your due diligence. Make sure that it's a good organization. Make sure that they're doing the right kind of work. Make sure they're in a space that you want to support, and then ask them how you can be involved. And I see too many people who try to do Lone Ranger stuff or who think that they have an answer when they only have part of the facts. And so, a good example is I get phone calls all the time from people saying, I'm making a bunch of sandwiches in my kitchen and I'd like to bring them down to the mission and hand them out to homeless people. And I go, no, please don't.
We spoke about that. The first time I contacted you was about the blessing bags, right? And you were like, it's a Band-Aid.
And not only that, if it's food, we actually can't touch it because we're certified by the Quebec authorities that our kitchens are a certain way. And so we respect the cold chain, for example, and every other chain that's out there, and we're inspected. So if you bring us sandwiches, I can't use them. I have to throw them out. So those are the sorts of things. So we would say, okay, don't make sandwiches. Let's talk about what you can do.
Right.
And so there's answers that you can come up with, and there's ways of serving that will be very helpful. And that's where I always recommend connecting with an organization that's already in the space and saying, what can I do to help? How can we help you? How can my organization help? And I think that's the best way to proceed if you've got something that's really tugging at you or a problem that you see that you'd like to resolve.
So we have 2 minutes less than 2 minutes. Kate, and it is spicy, Kate. She said, this may be a bit of a spicy question, but I'd be so curious to know about Sam's thoughts as CEO of a nonprofit about the recent grocery store robbery to feed those in need here in Montreal. Do you want to take that, or do we take a pass?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, the problem with food insecurity is not grocery stores, it's poverty. So robbing a grocery store to put a bunch of stuff under a tree is a misguided effort. So they did it in Santa Claus suits and so on. We don't want to villainize grocery stores. And in fact, I would add this. The grocery stores in the province of Quebec are among the best in North America at giving away food that is on the edge of being able to be used. We have a whole system in place for food recuperation. So I don't want to be penalizing Metro or IGA or Costco or any of those people, Provigo to name just a few. These are people, grocery prices are grocery prices. We can have a separate debate about the validity of prices. But the answer to food insecurity is to raise the people out of poverty, and then they'll be able to afford food. It's not to steal food and give it from the rich to the poor.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. listen quickly. Do you have a favorite book or podcast you want to share that's around leadership that people should listen to or read?
I haven't been doing podcasts recently, but I just read a book by one of our board members about it's called "Everyone We're All Ambiverts Now" by Carl Moore, and what he describes as communication styles and the fact that we've always separated the world into introverts and extroverts, and really what we all need to be doing is making an adjustment. So if you're an extreme introvert, you need to be able to project into extroversion. If you're a way out there extrovert, you need to sometimes take a pill, sit down, be calm, listen, as opposed to speak. And so I thought that was an interesting thing, and I certainly recommend it to anybody who wants to understand communication style better. In the book, he interviews a lot of corporate leaders and asks them about their styles, so you'll get a bunch of interesting and good advice from that.
That's perfect. Sam, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. It's been really enlightening, and you're always so generous with your time and your knowledge. So thank you for joining us, and thank you to our listeners for being here today.
You're very welcome.
Thanks, everybody.